Hey, everybody. Okay, hello, everyone. All right. So today I want to talk about the faces of God. But before we start, um, I want to say that much of what I'm going to share with you today is already available in my book, Fullness Guide to Sonship and Mysticism. If you have not gotten it already, you are missing out. I do a lot of Q&As. I talk to a lot of people on different stages of your journey, and y'all have the same questions. That's how I know that any of you that are actually trying to grow in the spirit, mature in your along your journey, actually understand who you are as a son of God, and so all that stuff, right? This is a textbook that I put together a few years back that pretty much covers everything that you need to know for really getting grounded in your spiritual journey, really growing and maturing as a son, functioning in the kingdom. This is what you need. So, with that being said, let's move on to what I actually want to talk about today, which are the four faces of God. Now, there are four main faces, and I say four main because there's actually a lot more than four. I'm going to start out dealing with four. So, in traditional understanding, you have the four faces, right? You look at Revelation, it talks about the four beasts. Even in, I want to say it also talks about it in Ezekiel, the man, the lion, the ox, and the eagle. And it talks about how they're all around the throne worshiping. But there's a simple principle at play here where whatever you're beholding is what you become. Whatever you spend time with and around, you turn into. So the fact that they have cherubim around the throne and they're taking on the image man, lion, ox, and eagle, that's proof that these are dimensions being displayed in front of them, and they're simply reflecting back that image. This is what cherubim do, by the way. Many people get this idea of cherubim and they think of a floating naked baby. That's weird if someone tells you that heaven is full of naked babies. Something's wrong with that. But no, cherubim don't even necessarily have to look like people. Cherubim, by default, their nature is that they are living mirrors and that they're reflecting back an image. And this is a perfect example of that. They take on the form of man, lion, ox, and eagle because that's what they're beholding. Cherubim are living mirrors. Now, when we start to really function in our sonship, one of the things that I have people know is that the four faces actually reveal dimension, or more so, the faces of God reveal dimensions of God. When you begin to function with the seven spirits, there's one of them that's heavy on this, and that's the spirit of knowledge. I like to pretty much present the spirit of knowledge as Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus, taking you on field trips so that you can understand how things work. In that, I often present the spirit of knowledge as a biology teacher, showing you who and what you are, right? Showing you who and what God is so that you understand who and what you are. Again, invoking that principle of what you behold, you become. So there's a general rule at play that in whatever way you experience God is that same dimension that they're trying to stir up in you. However, I see Yeshua is the dimension in which he's trying to activate within me. However, I see the Father, however, I experience Holy Spirit. Those are dimensions that they're stirring up through the interaction. So you know who's actually intimate by their behavior, right? You can't claim to be with Yeshua all this time and none of his traits rub off on you. It's one of my favorite quotes I borrowed from my old church. He said, God is too big to be in you and not stick out anywhere. that means that if there is a connection, there must be manifestation. So in this, I want to talk about some of the different manifestations and really give you an understanding as to why you are the way you are from a spiritual level. See, there's important things to be known about typology in that there are different brackets that we fall in that tell us how we're wired and why we're wired a certain way. That's when you get into things like Enneagram, MBTI, OPS, right? That is important for understanding the soul. But when we move into the spirit, you often, or let's just say most teachers fail to let you know that the spirit world is just as diverse, if not more, that there's different type, we're set up in different ways. So in the same way that there are four faces of God demonstrated in that verse, you have your man, your lion, your ox, and your eagle. These also act as dimensions. This is anatomy. This is anatomy. These are the four dimensions of your mind. These are your four faces. See, if you've ever viewed yourself in the spirit, you would typically see one of these, but that doesn't mean that the others do not exist. What actually happens is that we have what I call primaries, meaning that there's 1 to 2 dimensions of these that you operate out of more than not. Now, why do I call these dimensions of the mind? Well, one, the mind is a triune organ that exists in the body, soul, and the spirit. The mind is not the same thing as a brain, and nor is it completely tied to your soul. The mind is something that transcends all. And it deals with the what do you do more than it deals with the what are you. But it deals with what do you do. These are your actions. These are your instincts. These are your methods, right? Which means different dimensions will tackle the same problem or a similar issue in different ways. Right. So let's talk about the man dimension. Man, right? Man is the dimension of compassion, community, and empathy. People who operate out of this man dimension tend to be the people who bridge gaps well. This is a priestly dimension. This is an activist dimension. This is a very empathetic dimension. It reveals a state of vulnerability. So when you're having experiences with God, you're experiencing Elohim, and they come to you in the form of a person, they're coming to you not just to say that they are just like us as people, but they're revealing a side of you. They're being vulnerable with you, and they're trying to build connection and intimacy with you. This doesn't mean that they are limited to this form and this is all they are. No, they're more than even the few that I'm going to share with you today. I call these the universal faces. And vice versa, when you're appearing, like when we're having a really good conversation or a really important conversation, we say we're going to have a man-to-man topic. This means that we're both going to be transparent. We're both going to understand. We're both going to see each other and be heard. Right? That's the idea of man. Man deals with people, right? Shifting over to the lion, right? And we're going to circle back around these a few times. But next, we have the lion dimension. Well, the lion is the dimension of authority and dominion. Just as a lion rules his pride and rules his arena, lions deal in authority. Yikes. So lions, where man is dealing with connections, lion, for the most part, is dealing in boundaries. Next, we have the ox dimension. Oxen deal in power. This is your power dimension. Those of you want to know why you're not growing in power, you might not be engaging the right aspect of your mind, the right aspect of your spirit. But the ox is the dimension of power. This is power. This is endurance. This is stamina. Oxen have a special capability in that they are nearsighted, but they can pretty much see almost 360 degrees around themselves. This is indicative of something stuck in the present, stuck in the now. They only handle well what's directly in front of them. They don't see too far ahead. They don't see too far behind. There's a code in there. Next, we have the eagle. The eagle, right, sits up high, looks down low. This is a dimension of vision. This is a dimension of wisdom. The eagle has the ability to see far. Now, where the ox couldn't see far at all, couldn't see far behind, couldn't see far in the front, the eagle specializes in that. So it can see far into the past, see far into the future. But its weakness is that it doesn't manage the present all too well. At the same time, it tends to be antisocial, so it's not really operating around people. Now let's circle back through, right? I presented these as 4 different dimensions of your spirit that you actually have the ability to shift through, but you have a dominant one, right? Myself, talking about me, I have 2 primaries, lion and eagle. This is where a lot of my problems stem from. Lions and eagles are both predators, which means for most people, I register as a threat, whether I'm doing something wrong or not. Which means where other people got away with poor character, that's not a leisure that I've ever had because I've always been held to a high standard. My spirit registers different in the natural. And I'm not saying that to brag. This is just the way these realms work. Now, when it comes to, right, I mentioned that these dimensions, these operations of the mind, these dimensions of the spirit actually show you, or more so in control of how you operate, what you do, what you tend to do. So I like to give this presentation. Let's say you have someone functioning, an individual functioning in each of these dominantly, and they're given the same situation. How would they operate in it? So the situation I like to use is you have an active shooter. Let's say they're in a mall. The setting takes place in a mall, and there's an active shooter, a public shooter there. Well, what the man will do is the man will try to tell everyone to get to cover. And the man might be the one trying to talk down the shooter. No, you're better than this. I understand you. No, put the gun down. You know, the man is trying to appeal to their humanity. What about the lion? The lion might catch word that there's a shooter. The lion will have guards at all the perimeters. He set up some boundaries. He's upped the security because he realized there's danger around. And at this point, he's almost daring an intruder to come in because he's ready. Next, we move on to the ox dimension. How does an ox handle this similar situation? The ox is the one that sees an active shooter. He tells everyone, get behind me, and he heads straight for him. He like, I'm going to hit him. This is the one to go and tackle the shooter, wrestle the gun out of his hand. Right? He's getting up close and personal with how he solves this problem. So what about the eagle? How would the eagle solve the problem of an active shooter? The eagle would have told y'all weeks or months prior that that was going to happen on that day, and they would not be there. You would be left to your own devices on whether or not you obeyed or not. And that's a fun analogy I like to use for talking about the faces. But in this, like I mentioned, so you have the lion representing authority, the ox representing power, man representing character, and eagle representing wisdom. These are also 4 main manifestations of God. Remember what I said earlier, right? If God is in you, it must stick out somewhere. There must be a manifestation. These 4 are equals. These are not levels. These 4 are equals. They're just specialized in different areas. And in fact, where one has a weakness, the other has a solution to that problem. So part of the journey is actually learning to be flexible, recognizing your primary, but at the same time, learning not to be bound to one operation, because one operation can only work so well in every other circumstance. There are certain situations that man and ox might excel in, and others where they will be highly problematic. Let's talk about some of their flaws. While man is great at building connections, man, as in someone operating in that man dimension, finds it easy for themselves to be manipulated. They're the type of people to be stuck in abusive settings out of loyalty, just because of the connection. They're not necessarily known for pushing the boundary or setting boundaries, which means they're the type of people to let the same person or the same group of people mistreat them over and over and over again because they're selfless. But that selflessness, while it is a powerful strength, can also be their downfall. They have a hard time setting boundaries. They have a hard time telling people no. This is the truth of the man dimension. What about the lion? The lion, great at seeing in the dark. Oh, this is indicative of great discernment. They know what's standing before them. They see predator and they see prey. Now, lions aren't really that social. They work within their pack, within their pride, and they really don't like outsiders. They specialize in boundaries. So where the man is making connections and struggles to set boundaries, the lion is on the opposite end of the spectrum. The lion is setting boundaries, but might struggle to make any connections. They tend to be very tribal in that they work with their few and not too many others. They don't really come to where you are. You end up being allowed to come where they are. What about the ox? The ox, remember, this is the dimension of power, but I also mentioned endurance, durability. This, in many ways, is one of the dimensions associated with the apostolic. Lions and oxen, but they both deal with two different aspects of the apostolic. Oxen deals with the actual going and preparing the soil. They're the ones that are conquering a territory. Lions are the ones that rule the territory after it's been conquered. This is both in its own way apostolic work. Some also connect the ox to the work of evangelism in that it's going out to demonstrate. But the reason I wanted to highlight the ox in that fashion is because they tend to be heavy in warfare because their lack of wisdom. They don't operate in boundaries. And they're nearsighted, which means they usually don't recognize a threat until it's too close already. It's already upon them. They don't see any signs beforehand. They ignore all the red flags. They're colorblind. And they only really work in the present. This makes them easy to manipulate too. Right? In the sense that they won't necessarily notice a track record of mistreatment. And because they're so focused on the present and they're so focused on their work, it's easy for them to get so caught up in the work that they're doing that they forget to notice what else is happening around them. They can get tunnel vision. Right. So that's one of the flaws of the eagle, of the ox. They can be so focused on the present and so focused on the work that they forget to cater to the rest that's actually around them. This means that even relationally, if you step too far outside of their perimeter, they may forget you exist and it's not personal. You just stepped outside of the range that they typically operate in. Lions and oxen both tend to be territorial, but they're territorial in different ways. Eagles, isolators. They are isolated, usually operate by themselves. Eagles don't fly in a flock. They are by themselves. They deal in isolation, and that's a strength of theirs. Because where they operate from is so high, most things can't survive their climate. What they find normal, right? What they find normal, other dimensions might consider impossible. So no, they're not necessarily making connections. They don't necessarily have to set boundaries either because they don't interact. They're so far away that they don't really deal with warfare either. Nothing really flies as high as them. So they don't run into warfare. While the ox is always in warfare, will usually be in warfare. And oxen are made for that. That's a warfare dimension. That's a battle dimension. Oxen are tough. They're tanks. They're made to take damage and dish it out just as bad. The other dimensions, not so much. Some people ask me, you have the tetragrammaton, Yod Hey Vav Hey, is man, lion, ox, eagle. Both of the hays just so happen to land on the predators. That's an explosion. It's a yell. It's a shout. It's frightening. People who end up operating in the lion and eagle dimensions, well, lion and eagle manifestations is authority and wisdom. Wisdom and authority are the two things that scare people. Power will inspire somebody, but it doesn't really scare anybody. This is why oxen, right? They'll end up in environments that lions and eagles get mistreated in, just because they don't necessarily register as a threat. So even though they have the horns, even though they have all that power, they don't register to evil as a threat all too much. They're not predators. They're protectors, right? But these are the four main faces of God. And so, like I said at the beginning, we actually have all four faces. This is the way that your spirit is set up. Made in the image, right? Your image looks like their image. They have four faces. You have four faces. You're just not used to operating intentionally out of your faces. Now, this explains why certain leaders or certain ministries, certain groups can pour into you and others can't, even if they're both sincere. It's because of the dimension that you're operating out of dominantly and the dimension that they're operating out of. What works for one dimension might be detrimental for another. Right? Like I said, they all have their strengths and their weaknesses. So we talk about clashes between followers and leadership. Sometimes the clash is that you have someone who's operating in a lion dimension, mentoring people who operate in the man dimension. That sounds great if healthy, right? The lion can help them set some boundaries, but if taken too far, it can isolate them from their greatest strength, which is community. Vice versa, you take a man leader that has a bunch of lions under them. Guess what? All those lions will be trained to never set boundaries. They'll make some friends, but they won't have boundaries, and they don't have the grace for the connection the same way that men do. So they'll actually experience the hurt even more, because the struggle of the lion is trust. And it's easy to have experiences of your trust being mishandled if you are never setting boundaries. That's a journey. What about the ox, right? Right? Some of you are oxen. You're trying to learn how to operate in power, but your primary is an ox, which means it causes you to pull on a different dimension. When you want to learn how to operate in power, you don't go sit under lions as much as you might love them. You don't go sit under eagles as much as they might be valuable. These are different dimensions. Different leaders specialize in different things. When it's time to grow in wisdom, you find you an eagle. When it's time for power, you go find an ox. When you need more, when you need to learn how to operate in your authority, set boundaries, govern and rule and reign. Oh, that's lion stuff. When you're trying to build connections and form communities, that is a job for the man dimension. Now, your primaries, right? All of these are set up in an order for everybody on greatest to least likely to use. In my case, I'll use myself for an example. Lion, eagle, ox, and then man. That's a very peculiar setup. Not many like me. That means that, right, in order for me to form connections, people have to really go through 3 levels, which means I've been trained to be patient with people. I don't really have the story of needing to let my guard down to interact. It's quite the opposite. Most people have to let their guard down to interact with me. And that's just how my spirit is set up. Now, different people are set up in different ways. right? But I wanted to say that just to show you that they operate in an order. So me knowing that my primaries were lion and eagle, I always train man and ox. I train power and I train my character. I refine my character a lot because I know that unless I do it intentionally, it'll fall to the side and I just won't operate in it. Because of my primaries, wisdom is always going to flow and I'm never really going to have a problem moving in my authority. For some people, they could be completely opposite, that they're good with making connections, man, and they're great at moving in power. They struggle to set boundaries or use their authority, and they're not necessarily wise. This gives us grace for certain leaders, just being honest. Now, what if I told you that there were more than 4 faces? Oh, yeah. There's actually 8 universal faces. I call them universal because these are the faces that the family of Elohim all have. Every member of the family. Now, understand they're not limited to this. Going back to what I said at the beginning, how you experience them is a dimension that they're trying to stir in you. So they're not limited to these 8. In the same way they weren't limited to the 4 that many of you thought. But let's look at this. 8 faces. So at first we had man, lion, ox, and eagle. Next row, we have lamb, ram, dove, and serpent. These, again, dimensions of the spirit, dimensions of your spirit. We're dealing with spiritual anatomy. Now, this actually creates a wheel within a wheel setup, where the first 4 I call the crowns. These are the ones that you actually have primaries in. The second row of faces actually act as assistants to whatever your primaries are. Now, thinking about it like this, let me go back. Let me show y'all this again. So, in the same way that when it describes the scene in Ezekiel and in Revelation, you have the 4 faces around the throne, right? Man, lion, ox, eagle, so on and so forth, right? That's because the God that they're beholding has all 4. The heads actually spin. I've been going into the heavens for years. The heads actually spin. This means, right, just on a visible revelation of what's going on, the head spinning, these 4 faces shifting, represents that they're always prepared for whatever is coming before them because they're not locked into one form, not locked into one pattern. Flexibility is maturity in the spirit, the ability to choose whatever dimension is most appropriate. So that's what you're really getting. The faces shifting as they go around. That's proof of maturity. I'm flexible enough. I have whatever dimension is necessary to deal with the problem. So when we get to the next faces, right, you have one set of faces spinning. Well, this is an outer wheel, kind of like how they talk about the wheel within a wheel. That's your mind. That's an aspect of your spirit. So over on the first row, this is your inner wheel. The outer wheel is the second row. So let's talk about these next 4 dimensions. What? I didn't know there were other dimensions. Well, these are the extra 4 you'll actually find in the Bible. You just don't see them around the throne because they don't make decisions on their own. But you do see them. Oh, did not Yeshua, wasn't he known as the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world? Isn't he the ram and isn't he the lamb in Revelations with the 7 eyes and the 7 horns? Oh yeah, lamb is a dimension of him. Don't y'all have a bunch of gospel songs talking about worthy is the lamb? Right, this is him. This is that dimension. This dimension deals with purity and it deals with safety. Next, you have the ram. The ram, where'd rams come from? Well, why do you think rams were sacrifices in the OT, in the Old Testament? That's a dimension. See, the sacrifices, in many ways, he was requiring of the people to present an aspect of himself back to himself. Y'all will get that later. But not just that, we have an example of this. Abraham goes up, he gets ready to kill his son Isaac, and tells him no, and they provide a ram from the the ram in the bush, right? Y'all been calling Christ your ram in the bush for years. This is a dimension, deals with selflessness, sacrifice, but at the same time deals with protection. Somebody that operated in the ram dimension heavily was Moses, because rams have a code for ascension just like eagles do. Eagles soar. Rams have a specialty for climbing. They can climb where eagles soar. It takes them a little longer, but they get there. So you get this depicted with Moses climbing up the mountain to meet with Yahweh in the Old Testament. Not only that, but think about, remember, I said everyone in Elohim has these faces. Notice Moses' appearance when he comes down from the mountain. The word used there is the word Quran. When it talks about his face shining and glowing. Well, the word Quran means glowing brilliantly, blazing, and with horns. So he's climbing up mountains and he has horns. Oh yeah, he's around. He was occupying that dimension to such a degree that he took on the physical characteristics of it. Well, next we have a dove. Dove sounds familiar. Y'all have been using them in your ministry posters and flyers for years. Dove, representative of Holy Spirit, says Holy Spirit came down as a dove. This is a dimension that represents the prophetic, represents fire, communication. There was a saint, one of my favorite saints, Saint Basil. He had a special grace with this dimension. Sometimes his body would break out in the fire of God to the extent where he would actually be wrapped in fire. Actual flames would cover his body. Not just that, but on many occasions, when it was time for him to prophesy and speak a word to the people, a dove would fly in from outside and rest on his shoulder, and the people described it as if it was whispering the messages to him directly. Powerful stuff. And finally, we have a serpent. What? I thought serpents are bad. No. Serpents aren't bad. If serpents were only bad, why did God give Moses a serpent in Egypt? Could have gave him a staff to turn into anything else. No, he gave him one to turn into a serpent. Wait, if serpents are bad, how come in Numbers, when all the people were afflicted by the vipers, Moses was instructed by the same God who told them that idols was bad to create an idol, to create a bronze statue of a serpent resting on a pole, and anyone who looked at it would be healed. Okay, serpents aren't bad. Serpents represent healing. Serpents represent sensitivity. Serpents represent wisdom. Doesn't your scriptures also say you have to be as wise as serpents? This is another dimension of wisdom. How that wisdom is used, that's a separate topic. But the serpent on his own, no, that's a dimension of God. Even expressed via the seraphim. Heaven's full of serpents. So these are secondary dimensions that operate. So no, you don't just have 4 faces, you have 8, and they all occupy dimensions of your spirit. So you actually have 16 possibilities of operation in which you can flow in the spirit if you're healthy, because you have one wheel spinning one way, another wheel spinning another. These are all possibilities. These are all collaborations happening. Moving through the dimensions. See, and this is why I call the dimensions cherubic. Because just as the cherubim have their 4 faces, you have those faces too, plus a few more. These are all dimensions. So when you learn to do things as God does, you learn to do the things of God. You learn to operate from the same dimensions as God. Different manifestations. Now, the journey is less about begging God to give you stuff. It's more about exercising the dimension that God uses when they're doing stuff. Father, spending time in intimacy with the Father, recognizing the dimension that he's operating out of when he's doing certain things. Spending time with Yeshua. What dimension are you operating from? What face are you pulling from when you're bringing about that result? You get to watch Yeshua be cherubic his whole life. He's somehow building connections, setting boundaries, moving in extreme feats of power, walking in his authority and wisdom beyond measure without skipping a beat. These are dimensions, right? That's the journey. We talk about maturing in sonship. Part of maturing in sonship is moving from begging into the operation. Show me how you do that. What dimension did you do that from? This is what it's about. So I'm going to look and see if there's any questions in the comments below. And if not, we're going to wrap up for today. But in the meantime, right? Let me put this back up here. My book, for those of you who haven't gotten it already, Fullness, Guide to Sonship and Mysticism. I talk about this topic there. This is a topic that I cover in my book in much, much more detail. Actually teaching you how to shift between dimensions, how to operate, what to expect in different dimensions. So let me check and see if there's any comments. If not, I love y'all and we done for today. All right. All right, y'all. So that's it. No questions so far. So that's it. As I said before, check out my book. I talk about this in much, much more detail there. So let's pray and then we could go. Right, Father, I just bless your people. May they really get comfortable in operating as you operate. Help us all get a bit better and not being tied to what's familiar, instead being as flexible as you've shown your flexibility, so that we can actually be of some help to a world that needs us. Move us through these dimensions, and I ask for those who are sincere, Father, may they have experiences and encounters with you in all of these dimensions. Amen. Y'all be blessed.